When you help people actually be more authentically themselves, you not only help them to be wealthy in their financials, but you also help them to be wealthy in their family life, their personal life, and their careers and what they do. So years ago, I had decided to find the courage to ask the right questions to my clients. And I decided to actually publish my first book, and this was before Harvard Business Review came out with there's this thing called behavioral finance. Well, I decided to let my freak flag fly, and I actually wrote my first book called The Emotion Behind Money. And it was about building wealth from your inside out. What does that mean? It's about building it from everything that is authentically you, and be and scream that to the world. And then one of my mentors said to me, I called him Lou Knox, he was my dad in the business. And he said to me, he goes, Jewel, I read your book. And I said, yeah? You ask your clients these questions? I go, I do. And then I try to decide, well, was I just young and dumb at the time in my 30s, or was I cutting edge? Well, behavioral finance came a few years later. I'm going to take you back to my time that I spent with Deepak Chopra. I spent about 12 years working with Deepak closely. And through that 12 years, what I learned was there is this huge integration between our health and our wealth. And let me explain this with one of my clients. Bernadette came into my office one day and she said, Jewel, I am so far behind in my retirement planning, you don't need to tell me how far behind I am. I just need to get on the right track. And I said, okay. So she came in, she had like $45,000 of credit card debt, she had over $200,000 income. So she was making good money, she had saved in her 401k. A lot of times we meet people like that. And she said, okay, get me on this track. So I gave her to-dos, she came in the next January for her financial checkup, paid me a consulting fee to do that, and she gained like 30 pounds. But her credit card debt was down to like 10 grand. And I was like, oh, isn't that interesting? She got heavier, but her debt went down. The next year, she came in for her financial checkup, and then she's like, oh, I'm like, you look great. She totally thinned up. She was training for an Ironman. Guess what happened to her credit card debt? Whoop, back up to $32,000. And then I started to realize, and I started to ask those questions like I have in my book, The Emotion Behind Money. So, is there any regrets that you have in life? Is there something that you really desire that you're not going after? And she's like, the ship's already sailed. She was 47 years old, and she goes, I always wanted to be a mom. I'm like, well, you manage a $2 billion charitable foundation. I think you could become a mom. Like, there's surrogates, there's fostering, there's adoption. She's like, no. She goes, I got divorced when I was in my late 30s because I had married an alcoholic who was like my dad, and then I wound up with a boss who was a narcissist and an alcoholic. So she was repeating these patterns of the same person in her life that she was drawing in. And I said, you can do anything you want, but what I do know is that if you don't follow your heart and your soul, you're always going to regret it. A few years later, she not only became a foster parent, but at age 52, she actually adopted those 2 foster girls, and today, they're going off to college. She not only then attracted a job where she made almost double the amount of income, but she also had those babies, and then she actually found the relationship a little bit different than her traditional Irish immigrant parents had expected of her, but she's super happy. And in my book, I talk about how Deepak used to say that a cancer cell develops because that cell has lost its sense of purpose. So I'm gathering to think that there's probably a lot of gentlemen in the room between 55 and 65 years old. Well, what I realized in my client base was that 50% of the men between 55 and 65-year-old were developing cancer around their hip area. And I was like, why could this be happening, and how, according to Deepak, did these guys lose their sense of purpose? Every single one of them had lost their job, not by their choice. They were not emotionally ready to retire, but they had the 2x4, they got cracked over the head, and they got their severance package, or had to leave for family reasons, or whatever that was. And I was like, So then I started to think, going, wow, men are such great providers for their families that they actually do it at the cost of themselves, that they forget to take themselves along for the ride. And us ladies, we're not absent from that either, because what we do is we nurture everybody else before we nurture ourselves, and that shows up as breast cancer. So I started asking questions to people like, do you love what you do? Or are you excited to go to work every day? So I started to ask these questions. We're in different areas of life, different than the ones that we were taught in a lot of our seminars growing up as a financial planner. And I would ask, if you were to stop providing for a family, would you quit your job? So many people, their jobs fed their heart and soul at that point, but it didn't any longer. And so it's like, how do we get these things into alignment? Because if we don't, what I've realized is our clients and ourselves create financial leaky containers. 50% of your money is going out the door in divorce. You're breaking up your business with your business partner, all because you chose to not show up in the world that's in alignment with your heart. Along my journey, then, I found an organization called heartmath.org. Anyone ever hear of HeartMath? It's a great organization that does research, and they realized on 9/11 that the magnetic force of the Earth went to 4.1 times its normal reading. And then they decided to look at what were the other peaks at the time when the magnetic force would go up. Well, it was when Mother Teresa died, when Princess Diana died, and I'm sad to say, but also when The Bachelor picked his final date. It's the most world-renowned show. But what they realized is that the human heart was that magnetic force, that when we had these events across the globe, that the strongest magnet on this planet is the human heart. So we all sit in this room, we all make smart financial decisions for ourselves and for our clients, but the magnetic force of your mind only goes for 2 feet. The magnetic force of the human heart goes for over 8 miles, and they don't have anything to measure it farther than that. So I started to think with myself going, even though I went to the University of Illinois and I went to the University of Notre Dame with my master's, I'm pretty smart. But that wasn't going to create lasting change and impact with my clients or in my own life. So I decided that we really have to start with our heart and design our lives from there, along with helping our clients to do the same, and then add our smarts. When my second book came out, Awaken Your Wealth, I had this amazing editor at Hay House Publishing Company, and she just drilled me into like, well, what do you ask these people? How do you get to these things? And I'm like going, oh my God, this is like brain surgery. I'm like, I don't know, I just do it. I just channel it, I open it, and I just ask the question in the moment. Many of us probably do that in this room. Well, she forced me to actually put all these questions that I would ask, not only in their financial life, but also in their family life, in their careers, in their personal life. What did they really want to design, and what did they really want to create in their lives? Now I have an online platform where I have all the social media, YouTube, and all kinds of stuff where I now have these worksheets, which you guys could go to juliemurphy.com, and if you wanted to know what some of these questions are or get my book, Awaken Your Wealth, they're all there. Because it's about digging deeper so that you can tap into the heart with that magnetic force of 8 miles long so that they can manifest and attract exactly what they want to do. Or what happens is disease develops in your body. I have seen this over and over. How many of us know that our clients, within 3 to 5 years of retirement, they get sick? It's because they don't know what the next adventure is. They don't know what their sense of purpose is now that they have crinkly skin and gray hair. And it's like, what? So this is the foundation of my company, JMC Wealth Management, that we help people really get to their core of their authenticity, to really scream that to the world, or as those of you who've seen me speak before, I always say, let your freak flag fly. And I was like, why not? You guys didn't think that was funny? You guys are a little flat today. All right. So how do I practically apply this to all those left-brainers in the room going, when is she off this stage? So this is a very practical, AssetMark's risk questionnaire is up on your left side, and on the right side is financial DNA. When we started doing 2 risk questionnaires for our clients, the left brain logical comes up with, I know my age, I know where I'm at, I'm supposed to be balanced, I'm supposed to be growth and progressive growth, I've been educated, and this is what I'm supposed to be, and this is what I'm supposed to be. But then we have the right brain that actually messes with us a little bit. And the right brain actually is their emotional brain. And so we find that often people have a growth profile on the left brain, and their right brain is sitting there going, yeah, I'm ultra conservative, and I'm going to call and complain when the markets go down because I'm going to go after compliance and all of you guys in the room. Because their emotional brain, which for each of us is hardwired into our brains before we're 7 years old. So they're not responding to how good or bad their portfolios are, or the market or the economy. They're responding from that little boy or little girl before 7 years old, where it hardwired into their subconscious mind, and your subconscious mind actually is what reacts to the world around you. So I always ask, what's your why today, and why are you doing it? I'd like to conclude with a story of Henry. I'm not going to tell you his real name because that's against compliance and I can't do that disclosure right now. But Henry, about 10 years ago, he was Baxter executive and he retired. Then he started to become an adjunct professor and he started to do his thing, trying to find his passion, his purpose, post his retirement, his late 60s, wound up with cancer, but it was a rare appendix cancer where it was a 1% chance that he was going to stay on the planet in the next year. I said to Henry, I said, you know what, over the last decade of me knowing you, the only thing that I ever hear you talk about is the organic farming that you did in central Illinois when you lived in your parents' house that you've now inherited, that you've still done nothing with. And I think the best chemotherapy you're ever gonna have is to go buy a pair of overalls and go work that organic farm down the block from where you live in the suburb of Chicago. And he's just like, okay. Well, then he came back and he was like, so that house renovation you were talking about, that's like, I'm never going to be able to resell the house for $250,000, let alone put 300 grand into it. Well, Henry decided to actually take the leap. He took the leap, he renovated the house, he didn't put 300,000 into it, he put $500,000. But I told him, it's a fraction of your interest because you're worth $6.5 million, who cares? I said, this is about extending your life. It's not about what, but maybe it's some of it about what you leave, but it's about how do you activate your heart and your soul so that you're living this next chapter of life in abundance. Not only did he survive the cancer, he's now still on the planet 11 years later. He's pushing 80. He's decided to move back to Chicago, but not only did he create a rec room for central Illinois who didn't have a gym, there's basketball courts and workout rooms, something you don't have in the middle of farmland. He's on the board of directors there, and he helped to build and create that. He impacted many of lives in Illinois. He then turned his home geothermal, heating and cooling, organic farming without pesticides and herbicides, transitioned the whole 600 acres that he had into this kind of farming that fed his heart and soul. And this young man with his 4 children, he just gave the house to him and sold it for $200,000 to live on his legacy as he moves back to Chicago now that he's needing to be more by his grandkids and everything. So the moral of the story is that when you help people actually be more authentically themselves, you not only help them to be wealthy in their financials, but you also help them to be wealthy in their family life, their personal life, and their careers and what they do. Thank you.